The barometric pressure dropped 12 millibars in under 20 minutes, and the first aluminum pole snapped like a gunshot. My observation tent split down the center seam before I could save anything except the data case strapped to my chest. Rain hit the ridge so hard it bounced off the mud. Wind tore across the high-altitude clearing, flattening the grass and driving cold water under the collar of my storm jacket. The sky had gone from steel gray to bruised black in less than an hour. Every model I had checked that morning had predicted a hard front by nightfall, but not this. Not a pressure collapse this violent. Not a shear line strong enough to rip a reinforced field shelter apart in one clean motion. I dropped to one knee, clipped the waterproof Pelican case tighter to my harness, and shoved two backup drives into the dry bag at my hip. My autonomous data loggers were already anchored beneath the granite outcrop 20 yards behind me. They would record the pressure drop whether I survived the next hour or not. That was the only reason I could leave the clearing. Then I heard canvas snap behind me. Claire Thomas was fighting the storm with both hands. Her research tent stood across the clearing, lower than mine had been and better placed against the tree line, but the north corner was lifting. One guy line had slipped loose in the mud. The fabric bowed inward each time the wind struck. Claire stood outside in a rain jacket soaked dark at the sleeves. One arm pressed over a stack of hard-sided specimen cases to keep the lids dry. Her tan field cap was pulled low against the rain, and her jaw was set with the kind of focus people mistake for calm until they see the white grip of her fingers. I knew who she was. Lead botanical researcher, university field scientist, the only person on the ridge more stubborn than the storm. Her alpine samples had to stay alive until extraction, or her 10-year study on high-altitude plant adaptation would die with them. Her dean, Dr. Aris, wanted that failure. He had been trying to pull her field budget for months, arguing that her live sample methodology was too risky and too expensive. If she missed the extraction window or lost the samples, he could declare her non-compliant and move her funding back into lab-only work. My own situation was not clean either. This storm was my final chance to prove a mountain pressure model I had spent 3 grant cycles building alone. If my loggers survived and I could extract the full dataset, I had a shot at the weather data grant that would keep my research alive another year. If I abandoned the instruments too early, the model died. But my loggers were autonomous now, and Claire's tent was about to fail with her entire study inside it. I crossed the clearing. "North corner!" I shouted over the wind. "Your line is slipping!" Claire looked up through the rain. "The mud won't hold the stake." "It will, if we triangulate it. Prince." I dropped my pack near a flat rock, pulled the mallet from my side loop, and drove a steel peg into the ground at a sharp angle. The mud swallowed half of it before it caught rock. I threw a second peg farther downslope, then ran military-grade paracord from my harness kit through the tent ring and around the exposed root of a Douglas fir. Claire did not freeze. She did not ask me to explain every move. She watched the geometry once, understood it, then shifted the specimen cases behind the windbreak without being told. "Give me the loose line," I said. She handed it over. Our gloves touched for half a second. Cold water ran between them. Then we both pulled back to work. I tied the clove hitch, cinched the paracord until the main arch lowered, and drove a third stake behind the tree root. The tent shuddered once, twice. Then the whole structure settled into a lower profile against the storm. "Inside," I said. "Now." Claire grabbed 2 specimen cases. I grabbed the third and kept it level as we ducked through the tent flap. The noise dropped from a roar to a hard, constant drumming. Inside, the air smelled of damp soil, pine resin, cold nylon, and the faint, clean scent of sample alcohol sealed in vials. A hanging LED lantern swung from the center pole. Field notebooks were stacked inside a waterproof bin. A tarp divider hung along the back wall, creating a small changing area and gear space. Claire set her cases on a foam pad and checked each latch before she looked at me. The tent was intact. Mine was gone. The truth sat between us with rainwater dripping from my jacket. "The storm took your tent," she said. "It did. The fire road is already flooding." "Yes. The lower ranger station is 4 hours away in good weather. Longer now." She glanced at the rain hammering the door flap, then back at the specimen cases. Her expression changed from calculation to decision. "Stay in mine." I looked at the narrow floor space between the sample bins, stove kit, and sleeping pads. She was not making a romantic offer. She was making a survival calculation. 1 intact shelter, 2 sets of scientific data, and a storm that would turn the fire road into a river before dark. "Only if you promise not to regret it," I said. "I wake every few hours to check pressure metrics. My gear stays dry. I do not cross the divider. If either of us becomes uncomfortable, I move to the vestibule once the wind drops. As long as you don't step on the alpine moss incubators, she said, we won't have a problem. Clear boundary. Good. She pointed to the left side of the tent. You take that side. I'll use the divider to change out of my wet outer layer. I turned toward my equipment bag and kept my eyes on the brass zipper while she stepped behind the hanging tarp. Fabric rustled. A dry fleece zipped. Boots thudded softly against the mat. No jokes. No looking. No confusion. When she came back out, she wore a field fleece over a thermal base layer, practical and dry. She sat beside the specimen cases and opened a notebook with wet fingers. You're Ethan Scott, she said. Storm chaser. Meteorologist. Mark said you were tracking the same system from the ridge. Mark talks too much on base radio. Mark is the only reason half this camp still functions. That is true. I opened my tablet and checked the offline topographic map. The primary road is no longer viable. Soil saturation on that south slope hit 90% before noon. If the rain keeps this rate for another hour, that road turns into debris flow. Claire's pencil stopped. Eris ordered me down that road this morning. He ordered it from an office 300 miles away. He also canceled my helicopter extraction. Her voice stayed even, but she pressed the pencil hard enough to mark the page twice. He said if I don't reach the checkpoint by tomorrow, he files a safety violation and pulls my field budget. There's your trap. Yes. The tent shook. Water ran in silver threads down the fly sheet. The LED lantern swung once, throwing shadows across the floor. Why not call Mark for emergency pickup tonight? I asked. Radio repeater is weak in this valley. We can reach base camp for short transmissions, not enough for coordinates through this storm. Mark can hear fragments, but Eris controls the official extraction approval. Why not leave the samples and save yourself? Claire looked at the cases. They're live high-altitude specimens under thermal stress. If they sit unattended for more than 48 hours, the adaptation markers degrade. 10 years of work becomes compost. 2 constraints. One physical, one professional, both real. I set the tablet between us. Then we do not use the fire road. We hold here tonight. On day 3, the models show a lull long enough to reach the granite ridge. The lower road will probably slide by then, but the old survey trail above it should hold. By day 5, if the secondary front stalls, we move toward the mountain cabin retreat. It has a radio repeater and a forestry emergency lockbox. By day 7, Mark can extract us from the North Service Road. Claire stared at the map. You know that cabin? I logged it in my winter route book years ago. The Forestry Service keeps me on the emergency access list for storm monitoring. And your data? My loggers stay here under the outcrop. They'll record without me. Guiding you out with live weather data protects both our work. Claire leaned over the map, not toward me, toward the route. Show me the ridge. I did. For the next 2 hours, the storm battered the tent while we turned panic into process. Claire weighed each specimen case and wrote the numbers on waterproof tape. I marked the safe points on the map. We split the food into 7 days of lean rations. She stabilized the sample temperature packs with a small field thermometer. I reset my portable barometer and placed it near the vestibule. At midnight, the wind shifted northwest. The tent wall bowed inward. Claire looked up. The paracord? Holding. The ground may not. I pulled on my gloves. She stood immediately. I'm going with you. No. Her eyes narrowed. Not because you can't, I said. Because someone needs to stay dry and keep the samples off the wet side if the tent shifts. I'll check the anchors. You watch the floor seam. She absorbed the logic, then nodded once. 3 minutes, she said. 5. 4. Deal. I went into the storm. The rain hit like gravel. My headlamp showed the paracord humming under strain. The first peg held. The second had loosened half an inch. I drove it deeper, added a second cord to the fur, then built a triangle anchor with 2 spare stakes. Mud sucked at my boots. Water ran down my sleeves. When I crawled back inside, my gloves were stiff, and my jaw ached from cold. Claire had moved my sleeping pad closer to the small safe heater, still on my side of the tent. She handed me a towel without stepping into my space. 4 minutes and 40 seconds, she said. I negotiated with a rock. Did it win? It compromised. That got the first real smile out of her. Small, tired, but real. By morning, the clearing looked rearranged by force. Branches lay across the mud. My torn tent was wrapped around a stump 20 yards downslope. The fire road below camp had become a brown, moving ribbon. Day 2 was for holding position. Not dramatic, Necessary. We checked the loggers through sheets of rain. Claire tested her sample temperatures every 3 hours. Mark's voice came through the radio in broken bursts, full of static and worry. Ethan, Claire, copy, if secure. I answered from inside the tent. Secure, tent intact. Fire road compromised. Planning Ridge exit on day 3. Static cracked. Eris says, checkpoint. Non-compliance. Claire took the radio from my hand. Mark, log this. The fire road is unsafe. Samples remain viable. We are not abandoning the study. Mark's reply came back broken, but clear enough. Logged, stay alive, both of you. Claire handed the radio back. Mark always gives excellent technical guidance. Stay alive is a solid baseline. That afternoon, the rain slowed enough for us to step outside and inspect the terrain. The clearing had new streams running through it, thin silver channels cutting across the mud. I walked the perimeter with the anemometer clipped to my shoulder strap, while Claire knelt beside a patch of alpine moss that had been nearly buried by runoff. She used a plastic spoon from her food kit to lift mud away from the edges without tearing the root mat. You're rescuing moss during a landslide watch, I said. I'm documenting stress response. With a spoon. It's a precise spoon. I looked down at the scratched white plastic. I'll update my equipment list. You should. Very underrated field tool. A gust rolled down the slope, and the trees leaned with it. Claire pressed one hand over her notebook before the pages could flip. I watched her anchor the paper with her elbow, note the moss color, then tuck the sample vial back into the case without rushing. The woman did not need a rescue from incompetence. She needed the weather to stop being used as a weapon against her. That made the work cleaner. By dusk, we returned to the tent with fresh data and colder hands. I heated water. Claire tore 2 ration packets open and combined them into something she called field stew, with the confidence of a scientist who understood chemistry and the optimism of a person too hungry to care. It looked terrible. It tasted better than expected. Do not look surprised, she said. I am reassessing several assumptions. About my cooking? About powdered potatoes. She laughed into her cup, and the tent felt less like emergency shelter for exactly 10 seconds. The relief lasted until day 3. At 6:12 that morning, the mountain moved. It began as a low crack, somewhere below the trees. Then came a grinding roar. Claire and I stepped out of the tent just in time to see the lower slope collapse across the fire road in a wide, brown surge of mud, rock, and uprooted brush. The road disappeared in under 30 seconds. Claire stood beside me with the radio in her gloved hand. The static hissed before Dr. Eris's voice cut through. Thomas, this is Eris. You missed the checkpoint. I am logging your field team as non-compliant with evacuation protocol. Claire pressed the radio so hard her glove creaked. The fire road just washed out, she said. Your route is gone. You were instructed to descend yesterday. Yesterday, the route was already unsafe. That will be reviewed after you return. Until then, I am freezing your field account and recommending suspension of the Alpine budget. The radio hissed. Rain tapped on my hood. Claire lowered the device slowly. A corner of the map lifted in the wind and slapped against my knee before either of us moved. I held out my hand. Radio. She gave it to me. Dr. Eris, this is Ethan Scott, independent meteorological contractor. I am recording this transmission for an incident log. The fire road failed at 0612 after sustained saturation levels above 90%. I documented that risk before your checkpoint order. Dr. Thomas refused an unsafe route and preserved live research material under field protocol. If you penalize her for not walking into a debris flow, my full weather log goes to the University Ethics Board and Mark's base camp record. Static swallowed the line. Then Eris returned, clipped and cold. Ensure the samples arrive intact. The channel cut. Claire stared at the radio, then at the mudslide, then at me. He wanted the road to fail after I committed to it. He wanted a clean report with your name on the mistake. He almost got it. No, I said, handing the radio back. He got recorded. That was the first real turn. Not victory. A foothold. We left after the rain slowed. The ridge trail was worse than the map promised. Steep, narrow, slick, with needles and loose shale. I carried the heaviest specimen case on my pack frame because Claire's left shoulder had tightened after 2 days of lifting. She objected once. I pointed to the way she kept shifting the strap off that side. She gave me a look sharp enough to cut nylon, then let me adjust the load. I am not taking your independence, I said. I am moving weight so you can keep walking. I dislike how reasonable that sounds. I practice. The first mile took almost 2 hours. Every step needed a decision. Mud pulled at our boots. Branches slapped rainwater into our faces. The ridge rose above us like a dark spine, and the forest below kept groaning as runoff moved through roots and loose soil. Twice, we had to stop while I checked the slope angle against the map. Once, Claire spotted a fresh crack in the trail before I did and caught my sleeve before I stepped onto it. I looked down. The surface had split in a thin black line under wet pine needles. "Good eye," I said. "Plants teach you to notice ground before sky. I watch sky before ground. That explains why we make a functional team." I used a trekking pole to test the crack. The soil beyond it collapsed in a slow, ugly crumble, sliding 6 feet down into brush. Claire said nothing. She just marked the hazard on the waterproof map with a red pencil. Trust was not built by speeches. It was built by a red pencil line that kept the next person alive. By late afternoon, sleet began ticking against the tree branches. Day 4 trapped us below the granite ridge. The secondary front arrived too early, turning the rocks into glass. We sheltered beneath an overhang and used a tarp as a windbreak. Claire checked samples by headlamp while I recalibrated the handheld anemometer. The numbers were ugly. "We hold," I said. "The samples have 40 hours before the cold packs fail. I can stretch them to 56 if we keep them insulated and off the ground." Claire looked up. "With what?" I pointed to my foam sleeping pad. "No." "Yes. You need that. The samples need stable temperature more than I need comfort." She looked at the pad, then at me. "Your grant data matters too. My loggers are recording. Your samples are breathing." She did not thank me right away. She took the pad, cut it with her field knife into fitted pieces, and built an insulation layer around the cases with the efficiency of a surgeon. Only after the latches closed did she look at me. "Thank you. You improved the design. You donated the material. And team effort." Team effort. The overhang smelled of wet stone and crushed pine. Sleet clicked against the tarp. Claire leaned back against her pack and closed her eyes for exactly 3 minutes before opening them again to check the thermometer. No speech could have shown her fear more clearly. That night was the coldest. Without the foam pad, the rock carried every degree of the mountain into my spine. I slept in 20-minute pieces and woke whenever the tarp snapped. Claire noticed by the third time. On the fourth, she reached into her pack and tossed me a folded sample blanket. "It's clean," she said. "Not sterile anymore, but clean." I'm not taking sample insulation. It was the outer wrap. "Not temperature critical. I can manage." "Ethan." I looked across the blue-gray dark. She pointed to the blanket. "I adjusted the sample stack after you gave up your pad. I have margin now. Take the blanket so you can still walk tomorrow." The logic was sound. Annoyingly sound. I took it. "Team effort?" she asked. I unfolded the blanket and tucked it beneath my shoulders. Field tyranny. Also, underrated. The next 2 days became a test of systems. Day 5 brought clear sky and brutal cold. We crossed the granite ridge in bright sun that reflected off wet rock and made every step look safer than it was. I tested each foothold first. Claire followed, steady and silent. Once, she slipped on black lichen and caught my forearm. I planted my boots and held until she found balance. As soon as she was stable, I let go. "You make restraint look exhausting," she said, breathless. "It is a field skill." "It is a field skill. That is not in any meteorology manual. It should be." She laughed, and the sound moved across the ridge faster than the wind. Near noon, my handheld barometer began dropping again. Not much. Enough. I stopped beneath a crooked pine and looked west. A gray shelf cloud had formed beyond the far ridge, flat-bottomed and fast. The sky above it had the wrong color, a greenish undertone that meant hail aloft and sudden downdraft. Claire saw my face. "How bad?" "Not lethal if we move now. Very bad if we stay on exposed rock." "How long?" 2 hours before the gust front reaches us, maybe less." She looked at the specimen cases, then at the ridge ahead. "Can we make the tree line?" End quote. "Yes." "Then stop calculating out loud and walk." I almost smiled. "Yes, doctor." We moved. That afternoon became the hardest stretch of the route. The trail vanished into exposed granite slabs, then reappeared under dwarf pine, then vanished again beneath old snow caught in the shadows. I marked safe steps with trekking pole taps. Claire copied each movement, slower but exact. The storm line followed behind us like a closing door. At one point, Thunder rolled across the valley. Claire glanced back. Do storms ever scare you? Yes. That surprised her. You say that very calmly. Fear is data, panic is noise. She absorbed that while stepping over a fallen branch. What do you do with the data? Adjust the route. Thunder rolled again. This time, she did not look back. By sunset on day 6, the cabin appeared through the trees. Heavy logs, metal roof, one small window catching the last orange light. I found the forestry lockbox beneath the porch rail, entered the access code from my weather permit, and opened the door. The cabin was cold, dusty, and dry. Dry mattered most. I started the wood stove while Claire set the specimen cases on the table. My hands shook from fatigue, but the match caught on the second strike. Flame climbed through the kindling. Smoke pulled cleanly up the pipe. Claire stood by the table, looking at the boxes. They made it this far, she said. Yes, we made it this far. Yes. I pulled a dry field fleece from my pack and placed it on the chair near her, then turned toward the radio desk. The back room has a privacy curtain. Change out of your wet outer layer. I'll call Mark. She picked up the fleece. The fire cracked softly between us. Ethan. I looked at her face, not at the wet gear, not at the fatigue written into the line of her shoulders. You have kept every boundary you named, she said. I said I would. Most people say things when conditions are easy. I turned back to the radio before the warmth in her voice made me forget the order of operations. Then we keep conditions documented. The cabin radio worked on the 3rd frequency. Mark answered with a burst of relief so loud the speaker distorted. Ethan? Claire? Tell me that is you. It's us, I said. Cabin repeater active. Samples viable. Need day. 7 extraction from North Service Road. Claire leaned close enough to speak into the microphone, but not into me. Mark. Log that Dr. Eris ordered descent through a route that failed. Ethan has saturation data. I have sample temperature records. We need the university board copied before Eris edits the narrative. Mark paused. Then his voice came back steady. Already started. I have the mudslide timestamp from Ranger Dispatch. I'll meet you at extraction with the incident file. Claire closed her eyes. This time, it was relief. We spent the final night in the cabin with the specimen cases on the table and the radio crackling every hour. The wood stove turned the room from freezing to tolerable. I hung our wet outer layers near the fire, boots angled carefully, so the soles would dry without cracking. Claire used an old cabin towel to wipe condensation from the sample case lids, then lined them up by temperature priority. After that, she opened her notebook. You're still writing? If I wait until base camp, I'll forget the field conditions. You nearly fell off a ridge today. And the moss on the north face had fresh lateral growth, despite ice exposure. Of course it did. She glanced up. That sounded almost fond. It was scientific admiration. Very clinical, reliable category. Luff. She smiled and kept writing. I sat at the radio desk, copying pressure readings from my handheld into my field log. The pencil scratched against paper. The stove popped. Wind pressed against the cabin walls and failed to get in. For years, I had treated silence as proof that nothing could disappoint me. Empty tents, empty trucks, empty motel rooms after storms. No one to explain myself to. No one to let down. This silence was different. Claire was across the room, writing about moss like it could save the world. My data sheets were drying beside her sample charts. The fire was not mine or hers. It was ours, because both sets of work needed it. I did not say that out loud. I added another log entry. 2,230 hours. Cabin secure. Samples viable. Team stable. The tracked vehicle arrived the next morning. Day 7. The storm had washed the world clean. Pines dripped under a hard blue sky. The North Service Road was rough but passable, and Mark stood beside the snowcat in a red field jacket, waving both arms like an angry signal flag. You look terrible, he called. Claire stepped down from the porch with a specimen case in each hand. You always know what to say to exhausted scientists. I practice on Ethan. I loaded the heaviest case into the snowcat and secured it with 2 straps. Mark handed me a sealed folder. Incident log. Ranger dispatch. Eris transmission summaries. University board is waiting at base camp. And Claire looked at the folder. He moved fast. I threatened to send Eris's voicemail to the dean's wife, Mark said. Claire stared at him. I'm kidding, he said. Mostly. The ethics office was enough. At base camp, Dr. Aris stood near the command tent with two university board members, a ranger supervisor, and a look that said he had expected us injured, late, or empty-handed. We were none of those. Claire stepped out first. She carried the lead specimen case herself. I followed with the weather logs and pressure data. Aris moved toward the case. Claire shifted it out of reach. Do not touch my research. The camp went still. No shouting. No drama. Only wind moving through wet flags and the hum of a generator near the medical tent. Aris forced a thin smile. Dr. Thomas, this can be discussed privately. No, she said. The field account was frozen publicly. The safety violation was logged publicly. The correction can be public too. Mark handed the incident folder to the board member. I opened my data tablet and displayed the pressure fall, saturation curve, and mudslide risk projection. The fire road was unsafe before the evacuation deadline, I said. Dr. Thomas's decision prevented injury and preserved the samples. My loggers captured the full storm cycle, and my grant data confirms the route failure. The ranger supervisor nodded. We closed that road after the slide. If they had been on it, we would be discussing recovery, not compliance. Aris said nothing. Claire placed the specimen case on the table between them. The samples are viable. The temperature logs are intact. My methodology holds. I am requesting immediate reinstatement of the field account, removal of the non-compliance note, and an ethics review of Dr. Aris's evacuation order. WAMS. One board member opened Mark's folder. The other looked at Aris. We will take this under review today. Today, Claire said. The board member nodded. Today? By late afternoon, the field account was unfrozen pending formal review. The non-compliance note was suspended. Aris was removed from direct authority over Claire's Alpine project until the ethics office completed the investigation. My weather data packet was accepted as supporting evidence for both the university record and my grant submission. Practical wins. Not perfect. Enough. Only then did Claire find me near the transport vans. She held a new folder in her hands. Not a specimen case. Not a crisis file. A grant amendment. Mark witnessed this, she said. The university board signed the temporary structure. Your role is paid, documented, and separate from anything personal. Meteorological logistics consultant for the Alpine study. Safety authority on storm routes. No favors, no blurred lines. I read the page. She had built the boundary before asking anything else. What are you asking now? I said. Claire looked toward the mountains. The ridge was still half hidden under cloud, but the worst of the storm had moved east. Dinner, she said. At base camp tonight. Mark is making something he claims is stew. It may be weatherproof glue. You can say no, and the grant amendment stays exactly as written. I looked at the folder, then at the woman who had carried 10 years of work through 7 days of storm and still made room for a clean choice. No regret clause? I asked. Her smile came slowly. Only if you promise not to insult Mark's stew before tasting it. That is a harder promise. I know. Mark shouted from the command tent. If you two are done making contract law romantic, the stew is getting cold. Claire laughed. The sound carried across the wet clearing, bright and alive. I took the heavier duffel from beside her boot and slung it over my shoulder. She raised one eyebrow. Moving weight? So you can keep walking. This time, she did not argue. She stepped beside me, matching my pace toward the warm light of the command tent. The air smelled of wet pine, diesel, wood smoke, and something that might have been stew if a person believed hard enough. Inside, Mark had set 3 enamel bowls on a folding table beside a stack of incident reports. The stew was too thick, too salty, and somehow exactly what the body wanted after 7 days of cold rain. Claire took one bite, looked at me, and waited. I swallowed carefully. It has structural integrity. Mark pointed his spoon at me. That is the nicest thing you have ever said about my cooking. Claire laughed again, and this time I did not look away from it. After dinner, we stood outside the command tent while the last strip of sunset faded behind the ridge. My pressure loggers were safe. Her samples were alive. Aris no longer controlled the story. Mark was inside arguing with the printer, which had jammed on page 2 of the ethics packet. Claire held the grant amendment against her chest. Tomorrow I go back to the university, she said, and I retrieve my loggers from the ridge once the access route opens. Then you disappear into the next storm? The question was light. The answer mattered anyway. I looked toward the dark line of trees. Not if the Alpine study needs a meteorological logistics consultant. It does. Then I'll file a schedule. A schedule? Storms require planning. 1. So does dinner. I turned back to her. The cold air moved between us, clean and sharp. Dinner again? I asked. When the final review clears. In town. No emergency rations. No weatherproof stew. No grant paperwork on the table. That is a very strict protocol. You respect protocols. I do. Then follow this one. I looked at the folder in her hands, the mountain behind her, and the woman who had not asked me to rescue her from the storm, only to help her carry the truth through it. Yes, I said. I'll follow it. She smiled, then walked back into the command tent to help Mark with the jammed printer. I stayed outside a moment longer. The first stars appeared over the ridge, where the storm had almost taken everything. I listened to the generator hum, the wet flags snapping softly, Claire's voice inside the tent correcting Mark's paper tray with scientific patience. For the first time in years, the silence around weather did not feel empty. It felt like the pause before someone called my name and expected me to answer. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Real protection keeps people safe without turning crisis into leverage. Green flag. They respect your work, your boundaries, and your choices under pressure. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this. The end.